Hey guys, Robert with Zenfolio here, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a custom client mockup using Photoshop. Now, the first thing that you're going to need is an image of the space where your client wants to hang their photos. So if you're not able to go and take that photo yourself, you're going to have to ask the client to do that for you. So you might want to give them some basic instructions. Now, chances are they're probably going to be using their cell phone to take this image, which is perfectly fine. So you might just want to say something to them like this: hey, I need a photo of the space where you want to hang these pictures. So can you do me a favor, grab your phone, just make sure that you turn it sideways and just go ahead and take a couple of shots of that space. Now, make sure that you're holding your phone as straight up and down as possible, and then take a couple of photos of that space straight on, and then do a couple from different angles. And then as soon as you get those images, just send them over to me. Now that we have our client's image, the next thing that we need to do is we need to find a point of reference. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and I'm going to use the television set as my point of reference. Now, I'm using that for a point of reference for a couple of reasons. One, this is the space that the client and I have discussed on where they want to kind of lay out their images and hang their prints. And the other thing is that I know how big that television set is, so I can adjust it and get my scale set appropriately so that I can make sure that the image placeholders that I put in here are scaled to the appropriate size. So the first thing that we're going to do is get that point of reference kind of centered up on our image here. So I'm going to use the crop tool to do that. So I'm going to click on the crop tool, and what I'm going to do is make sure that the grid is turned on, and I'm going to use the golden ratio grid. So when I click on there, and if we kind of zoom in, we can see that the television set is already pretty close to center. We might need to adjust it just a little bit. So maybe I grab this cropping rectangle and kind of drag it down, and we're just kind of adjusting it till we get that television set nice and centered up within that center section here. Once we do that, we're going to hit enter. And now we have that point of reference centered in our frame. The next thing that we're going to do is establish the project scale. Now, I encourage you to make a scale that's easy for you to work with. So for instance, the scale that I'm going to set up is every 10 pixels equals 1 inch. And I'm going to use that television set to help me establish that scale, because I know that that television set is a 60-inch set because I asked the client to measure it and they let me know. So we're going to jump in Photoshop, and I'm going to show you how to establish that scale. All right, so there's a lot of different methods that you can use to establish the scale in the image. This is just the one that I found to be the most easy for me. All right, and so a couple of things that you want to do. First, you want to make sure that your ruler is turned on. So if you don't see a ruler, you're just going to go into View and check ruler right here, or you could do a Command R and that will turn your ruler on. The other thing is you want to make sure that that ruler is in pixels, at least I do. So I'm right clicking on the ruler and putting it in pixels. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my shape tool, and I'm just going to create a rectangle that is 600 pixels long. All right, or 600 pixels wide. So you can see in that little box, this is 612. Don't worry about getting it exactly 600 pixels using this tool, because you can adjust it and fine tune it in the properties box. So when I let go of that, it creates this little line, and then the property window pops up. Now, if you're not seeing the property window, click on your layer, then go to Window and turn on the property panel right here. And then you can actually fine tune, adjust the width and height of that layer. So I'm going to go in here and adjust that so that that line or that rectangle tool is exactly 600 pixels wide. Okay. Now, again, the reason that I'm doing this is because we want to set up the scale to be 10 pixels per every inch. So that television set is a 60-inch TV, and I now have a 600 pixel wide rectangle, and we're going to use that rectangle to scale the TV to make this. So I'm going to grab that rectangle layer and just drag it down here as close as I can to the TV. And then we're going to zoom in. All right. Because in order to make the image to scale the way that we want it, the width of that television needs to match the width of that orange rectangle that we've created. And you can see it's already pretty close. So what I'm going to do in order to match that up is I'm actually going to go click on my background layer, and I'm actually going to duplicate it by doing a Command J. It's just a habit that I have. I like to duplicate layers first. Once I have that layer duplicated, then I'm going to go to Edit and Free Transform, or you can do a Command T. Now, when you do that, you want to go up here to your kind of dimension settings and make sure that the aspect ratio link is checked. That way, whenever you adjust the width, it also scales the image proportionately and adjusts the height. And now again, the goal is we're trying to get the width of this television image to match the width of that orange bar, and that will put our image to scale. So I'm going to click up here on the width and just start using my arrow key to bump up that width, and then clicking on the image to kind of move it around and get it in here so I can look at its alignment. Now, you don't have to get it perfect, but you do want to try to get it as close as possible. That is really close, so I'm going to go ahead and call that good and hit enter. And we've now scaled our image to know that for every 10 pixels in this image actually equals 1 inch. Okay, so now that we have our image set to scale and we have our point of reference centered, the next thing that we're going to do is set up a guide layout. And what this guide layout is going to do is it's going to help you place your image placeholders for the client on the space that you guys have discussed in a very neat and orderly fashion. Okay, so in Photoshop, you're going to go to View and you're going to hit the New Guide Layout option right here. And that's going to pop up a little window that looks like this that lets you put in a number of columns, number of rows. You can add some gutter to it. You can put margins around it if you need to, if you want to. So what I want to do is I want to kind of create a grid around this focal point, because this is where we're going to be building this mock-up for the client. And so it makes it much easier to have a grid on that space to work with. So since we have centered our reference point already, then this guide, depending on what numbers you've put in here, should already be pretty well centered on that reference point. It's just going to be a matter of playing around with these numbers that will help you build this kind of grid. So for instance, if I only had 8 in the column section, the grid is still looking pretty nice, but it leaves a lot of this space without a lot of guidance on where to place things. So I'm going to bump this back up to 16. And that gives me a lot of lines in this grid to really work with when I'm placing these different image placeholders here to help them get lined up and to place them nice and evenly across the space. So we're just going to hit OK, and that's going to put that grid here. Now you can turn that grid on and off by just hitting Command H on your keyboard. That's going to show or hide the grid. All right, well, the last thing we have left to do is to create our placeholders. This is what's going to allow us to show our clients how different size prints are going to look on their wall, place them in different layouts, and give the client a good idea of how these images are actually going to look in that space. We're going to use the frame tool to create these placeholders. Now, if you don't have Photoshop CC and you're using an older version of Photoshop, the frame tool is basically like a glorified image mask. Okay, so you can do the same thing with image masks. The frame tool just makes it a little easier. So we're going to use this frame tool and we're going to create some placeholders. Now, when you're thinking about this, you want to think about the different print sizes that you offer. I prefer to work all in the same aspect ratio. However, just make sure that you are familiar with the aspect ratios of print sizes that you have available to you. All the mockups that I'm going to make are products that are actually available through Zenfolio's integrated vendors. I prefer to start out with the largest image first, or the largest placeholder first, and kind of build around that. So the first frame that I'm going to put up here, the first mockup that I'm going to put up here, is going to be a 24 by 36. So I'm going to grab that frame tool and I'm just going to kind of drag it out. And again, remember our scale is that 10 pixels equals 1 inch. So we need to create a frame that is 240 by 360 pixels, and that would equal out to being a 24 by 36 print. All right. So that width, again, it needs to be 360. So getting it as close as I can. And then the height needs to be 240. So again, just getting it as close as I can. But if you don't get it exact, you can always double click right here and open up the properties and adjust that in here. So I need the width to be 360 pixels, and I need that height to be exactly 240. Okay, so essentially we've created a placeholder frame that's scaled, that's at 24 by 36 or 360 pixels by 240 pixels. All right. So now in this properties section, the first thing that we're going to do is if you're going to have your images matted, which most of us will, and framed, we do need to take into account that. So down here is the stroke tool, and you can use that stroke tool to actually create a matte look on these placeholders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that stroke tool to be 20 pixels, because when you use Zenfolio's integrated vendors and you add a matte, that is going to be a 2-inch matte. I'm also going to set that to be white. And then most importantly, we want to make sure that that matte is set to be outside, not inside, because it adds 2 inches to the image. It doesn't take away 2 inches. Really important to remember that part. Okay, and now we can go ahead and actually bring in an image placeholder and put in this. So I'm going to choose this little insert option right here, and I'm going to say place from local disk embedded. And we're just going to grab a file really quick that I have. So I'm going to grab this image right here and add it in my placeholder. All right. Now you can grab it, you could drag it around in here if you want. You can actually edit it internally by double clicking on it. For me, it looks pretty nice the way it is, so I'm going to go ahead and close this off. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is make sure that I have this placed where I want it within my grid. So I'm just going to use my move tool, grab that really quick, and just kind of get it centered up over this television image and maybe bring it down and kind of start trying to think about my layout and where I want my images to be. All right. Now that I have that set, let's go ahead and add another placeholder. So the next couple of images that I'm going to add in are going to be, we're going to go with 20 by 30s. So that's going to be 200 pixels by 300 pixels. So we're going to grab those and create those next. So I'm going to go back to my frame tool, go right over here. And again, I'm just getting as close as I can to being 300 wide by 200 tall, because I can adjust it in the properties window. So now that I've created that frame, I'm just going to double click here and I'm going to say, let's set that width to be 300 and the height to be 200. Let's go ahead and add that stroke, making sure that we do 20 pixels. And we set that stroke to be on the outside. And again, making sure that that stroke is 20 pixels. And then we can place our image in here. So using the place from local disk, and then choosing the image that we want to place in here. So I'm going to grab this one this time and place it in here. And we're going to close the properties. And then we can just come over here and grab our move tool and move it and get it lined up where we think it looks nice. Again, using this grid to help us place these images, make sure that we're keeping spacing the same and all of that stuff. Now, another thing that's really cool that you can do is if you know you're going to use a couple of frames that are the same size, you can actually go and duplicate those frame tools. So I'm just going to go over to this layer and actually just do a Command J. That's going to create a copy of it. I'm going to grab that copy and just drag it to the other side over here. And again, I'm using this grid to kind of set it up and get the layout the way I want. And then I just need to go back and change the image out in this copied version. So double clicking right here, going to the insert image option, and then we'll just choose a different image this time. So this time let's grab this one. All right. And so now we have a different image. All right. And we can hit Command H. We can turn off our little scale rectangle there, and we can take a look at how this is looking, and it's not looking too bad at all. And now I'm just going to quickly create a couple more prints, and then we can kind of play around with the layout using that grid. Now you can edit the image within the frame. So if you click on the image section over here within your layers, you can actually edit that image. So if I wanted to flip that one and make it to where she's looking in towards the frame, I could go to Edit, transform, and say flip horizontal, and it would flip her horizontally. So now we have our placeholders in here. We've kind of created this custom mockup. Now, what about frames? Well, one thing that you want to keep in mind about frames is that frames can add anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches to the size of the image as well. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to take all of our frame layers and we're going to combine them in a group. So I'm going to click the bottom one, click the first one up here, hit Command G, that's going to put them in a group. And then I'm going to use the stroke tool or the stroke effect to actually frame these out. So I'm going to double click on that layer, go to stroke, and then in the stroke settings, I'm going to set the stroke to be 10 pixels. That would be 1 inch. And then again, making sure that the position is set to outside, and then choosing that color to be black and hitting OK. And now we have a completely custom mockup for our client where they can see exactly how their images are going to look in their space. It's really easy to change it around, and you can use this tool to help your clients make decisions on what images they want, if they want them framed, if they want them matted, how big of a print do they want, and how is it going to look in their space. So it's a really powerful tool that you guys can use. So hopefully this video was helpful, and hey, don't forget we do live streams every single week. On Tuesdays we do Site Review Tuesdays, that starts at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and then on Thursdays we do Zenfolio Live, where we go live, we teach something, and then we have about 20 to 30 minutes of Q&A. That happens every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And hey, if you're looking for a previous episode of one of those live streams, you should be able to see that popping up on the screen somewhere right in here. All right, you guys, enjoy and take care.